joining us today. We will now hear from Mr. Donnie.
Check, check, mic check. How we doing today? As mentioned, my name is Donnie Rose. I am an alumnus of Southern University and a performance poet and a teaching artist. I first started performing poetry right here in this union, but well before that time, I was coming to this union as a very young person getting my hair cut in a barber shop. At the time, I was not fully versed on who this union was named after and why. Over time, I was able to learn more about the legacy, not only of the young men who the union namesake is behind, but also of the struggle and of the protests that led to the tragic moment that we are commemorating today. Before I begin the presentation, I just want to say that I reached out to several people to participate in this documentary style production. Some people were available, some people were not. It is my hope that I'm able to present as much of an accurate truth as I know it. This is about a 30-minute presentation, which features me doing performance verse, as well as interviews from folks I was able to talk to. So, for no further ado, I present to you Blood on the Bluff.
My biggest fear was when they started coming on campus and coming down, the police officers and all that coming down the campus. I was living in, I don't know if you know the dormitory in South Hall, is not no longer there anymore. The building is there, but it's not a dormitory anymore, right next to the stadium. Me and my roommate was looking out the window and we saw all the police coming and that big old tank. Well, I think they call it Big Bertha or whatever.
Yeah, that's
Coming down Harding Boulevard across the hump, you know. And then we said, oh, what's going on? What's going on?
They named me after a crime scene, a peaceful demonstration that was met with tear gas and projectiles. The portraits that hang from my walls, a sobering reminder of the highest cost of higher education, a memorial to boys that arrived in a different world from where they were coming from, only to graduate to the afterlife before Fall 72 commenced. My surnames are conflicted honor. I'm Smith Brown because Denver and Leonard's blood christened me, but never washed away the sins of their assassins. I rose within the center of the bluff, a descendant of ancestors who should have been considering spring semester classes, but instead were expelled from the earth before being able to turn their tassels. The etymology of my name, a tale of forefathers who were not fathers at all. Just kids caught in the crossfire of a governor's command, just sons of Southern who were also sons to parents that did not send them to school to become a history lesson. Denver Smith, Leonard Brown, 6 syllables that should have been announced in a graduation roll call rather than on the evening news. There should have been additions to a commencement program rather than the obituary section. And when my people walked the semesters that followed and received their degrees to rounds of applause that sounded like ammunition taking aim at their accomplishments, my floors would often wind up wet as I wept over who my forefathers could have become. I always thought about who was missing from the legacy of esteemed alum about who became posthumous instead of
Even killed at
post-baccalaureate,
State University,
about the namesake I
should
inherited.
never have happened.
I always
especially
reminisce
by the state.
over my blood relative.
Student death, and it really hits home when it's somebody that you saw a day or hours before, then you come back and it happened in your house, it happened where you live.
Police, they gave some kind of notice to leave the building in so many, so many seconds. They started counting down. And as they started counting down, they started shooting tear gas. They started shooting tear gas. And then the students, started dispersing somewhat. And then you started hearing, other fire things going on. You didn't know if it was more tear gas or what. So at that time, I was standing on the top of the steps. And so I dropped down to the side of the steps. And shortly after that is when I saw one of the guys laying on the sidewalk.
Denver Smith, age 20, classification junior, major computer science, hometown, New Roads, Louisiana. Leonard D. Brown, age 20, classification junior, major, agriculture, hometown, Gilbert, Louisiana. My forefathers left small villages to attend school in Big Baton Rouge. In the ash-filled aftermath of a country on fire, they were only a few proms removed from King being dethroned by way of a Remington rifle. Just the first diploma passed, Chairman Fred being demoted by way of a badge lynch mob. My people came to campus wide-eyed and afroed at the dawn of Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud. Can you see them? Brown-skinned and brilliant, dressed to the nines, brimming with Jaguar pride, moving in rhythm with an oasis of young, gifted, and Black dreamers. Now, pull the lens back and change the frame. Can you see them? November 16th, 1972, sprawled across the asphalt, stretched out like sacrificial lambs slaughtered by wolves in police clothing. Can you imagine the calls home? A mother hearing that her baby was one of the ones who got vanished in the ambush. A father learning that his boy would not be at the Thanksgiving dinner table. Leonard's brother identifying the bone structure of his feet in the morgue at Earl K. Long. Denver's sister being told that he did not survive a protest she helped organize. Picture of family's future being altered faster than bullets dismembering a student body. Now, fast forward a half century and picture me still wavering between the grief and honor of being named as a dedication, as a memorial to lives lost at the behest of a rumor that grew into a raid. I am the legacy of lethal force, permanently branded by an act of brutality. And some days, wearing this title weighs heavier than a stockpile of students collapsed atop each other, scrambling to escape the wrath of their rights being trampled on. Some days, I wish I was named after anything other than a miscarriage of justice, an unsolved murder, and orchestrated violence. I would be gladly known as anything else if it meant my forefathers could have completed their coursework, begun their careers, started their own families, and left the campus boasting about how they bled blue and gold instead of the world seeing just how red their blood actually was.
You can see long before I was able to see images, I had images in my mind of what that looked like. It's like two people came to college to better themselves and they were murdered. Like that's, that's everything that your parents aren't expecting. Like for you to go off and to go to this safe space, and not just that, but to go to Southern University and that it being what it was at the time and being this safe space, and then it's not a safe space.
I always like to ask the question, who benefits? With the narrative that two, young brothers, two Black men were shot down and gunned down for nothing, for simply just being Black. With that, send a bad taste in people's mouths about, the university. Would that cause, enrollment to go down, you know, possibly. Every time we discuss these things, they were saying, wait, we're gonna do this, change gonna come, but change came at the cost of these two young men.
My mother cried at the prospect that two young men senselessly lost their lives at the hands of law enforcement. My father was angry and voiced disapproval of the way in which the president of the university and law enforcement had handled the entire situation.
I have seen them all. The bleary-eyed ones exhausted from final exam cramming. The tipsy ones that got a little too lit under Greek trees during homecoming weekend. The starving ones whose housing paperwork ended up evicted from file cabinets. The ones who slid back in on the good graces of academic probation only to be ousted after their GPAs dropped lower than a drum major's backbend. I've seen queens coronated, kings of the computer lab raise their fists in celebration of grad school acceptance letters, student athletes hobble into my doors after broken bones sideline their full rides. I watch grown folks weep when they've gotten the news that the mothers and fathers that moved them on campus have transitioned to 5x7 memories on dorm room nightstands. So when my people pull up at my doorstep, we are family, they are home. We laugh and cry and argue like family do, and I hold them close because I know what it means to witness my kinfolk not make it from orientation to graduation, to watch somebody's brother be made to feel like an intruder in his own home, to see a complaint be met with cartridges manufactured to kill all that noise. Still, my hospitality be as warm as the blood that rivered from my forefathers. Be homegrown from the type of love that brought them to SU, a love that cannot be extinguished by gunfire or silenced by revisionist history. I embrace my people in remembrance of the boys who bled me into existence so that they never know what it is to wander about this institution without a home, so that they always feel in the presence
It's like
of family.
going back to their home. That has got to be the most traumatic thing. Like when you're in college, I mean, I know when I was in college, it was like utopia.
They began to check dormitory by dormitory, and so you had to leave. And many of us just took what we could take and left.
I'm going to the back, taking history. And I got a history building. I see all the people gather around me. And by the time we got through, they said, there it comes. The state troopers came around and started surrounding us. And I'll never forget coming forward and hit the English building to the science building, police on top of the roof for automatic weapon. Right now, it's just the sky and got light like a hurricane from dog. It's cloudy there like a bloody scene about to take place, battle like a Vietnam War.
Change don't come so quickly around here. An occasional splash of paint over blight, a dilapidated dormitory that finally meets its demolition after years of discomfort, some pockmarked pavement and faded lines between the mini dome and Mumford signaling the struggle to secure city resources across the hump, while a 20-minute ride south showcases the spoils afforded to the flagship school. For decades, my walls have echoed the frustrations of my people, and I've always given them space to roar. Welcomed them to relax in my living room and kept a shuffled card deck on deck for endless games of spades. Invited them to meander about my dining room to find grub of their choosing, encouraged them to gather in my ballroom to have big conversations or to revel in the pageantry of banquets and FGA debates. I know it's a jungle out there for us jaguars competing for material goods against tigers and bears. Oh my, how we have always done the most with the least. Like producing scholars from the scraps of state budgets that hardly ever accounted for first-generation prodigies, or cultivating a neglected yard into a garden that grows first-generation attorneys and educators and nurses and musicians. Whenever my people come over to visit, I try my damnedest to roll out the gold carpet, to allow them space to recenter after midterms, to open my side doors to the rhythm of the probate show, allowing prospective panhandle members to get a view from the cooler side of the burning sands, or to offer an open chair for a young brother in need of a lineup and some barberly wisdom. I know the sacrifice so many of my people made to get here, because I know the sacrifice that opened my doors to them. So I keep my space embracing, remind my people of how long we've remained rich with Jaguar pride, and tell them we will always rise, despite of anything that tried to bury us.
From a state level, and local level, one of the big things that the students were protesting was the inequity in funding, which sadly still happens today.
Number one, the governor should have made sure that his budget included equitable distribution of our tax dollars to some. The second thing is that he should have never deployed military style police on the campus of teenagers.
I remember seeing those pictures over and over and over again. They ran it ad nauseum for several days. Edwin Edwards had not long been named governor of the state, elected governor of the state. And there was a lot of questioning about the way that Edwin Edwards handled the situation, bringing National Guard onto the campus, allowing such a thing to take place with students that said that they simply wanted to have an opportunity to have their concerns heard by the administration and by the government.
Oh, Southern, dear Southern, you, crown jewel Black campus of the Bayou, you, Black administration, you, Black university president, you, once upon a time, open enrollment for Bay Area Black kids, Chi-Town Black kids, Houston Black kids, New Orleans Black kids, LA Black kids, New Jersey Black kids from every corner of the country seeking a chance to enhance their lot in life. If we knew any better, we would have called you on the B and C between the H and U, standing for bureaucracy and complicit, but we learned the hard way who was pulling the purse strings when your children were demanding better, and the B that showed up to respond to their grievances was a tank called Big Bertha. But before buckshots blasted my ancestors into oblivion, there were already crimes occurring on your grounds. Your kids, who looked to be loved on by their home away from home, found the conditions they encountered criminal, found the curriculum they were learning criminal, found their scholarship being valued at 50 cents on the dollar of LSU students criminal, felt like they were being robbed of a high-end education. And this is how I became what I became in the first place. This is how the crew of Fall 72 ended up boycotting classes for a month. This is why my forefathers' blood and brain matter had to be washed from the concrete after the state staged a war crime against their peers. Oh, Southern, dear Southern, you, birthplace, you, sacred ground, you, who built me up along the banks of the mighty Mississippi Blue, like that tank that sent your children scattering gold, like yellow-bellied administrators who left your kids in the clutches of 300 cops. I love you. I'm just hurt that my origin story be whispered about like an urban myth instead of a cold case. I know what's done is done, but I cannot help but wonder what would happen if the whispers about the bloodshed on your watch be amplified like a human jukebox halftime show and someone was held accountable. I mean, it ain't like this history can never be repeated. It ain't like I'm not always on edge whenever my people decide to galvanize for the greater good.
Southern was one of the only HBCUs to have a Black president at that time. So while the narrative says that these microaggressions were popping up across the country at HBCUs, we have to make sure that we articulate that everywhere else, it was about removing the white power structure from a Black institution. Whereas here, it was to remove the white hand behind the curtain that was restricting funds.
Every room inside of me should have been named after a freedom fighter, after a scholar who cared about their education and the material conditions the future Jaguar Nation would inherit, after someone who demanded change from those who had the power to make change happen. But when the smoke cleared on fall 72, the organizers who should have their names enshrined were exiled from the bluff, sent to study someplace other than the centerpiece of Scotlandville. Their forced removal, as devastating as the small trail of bodies their advocacy left behind, there is room for names like Fred Prejean and Ricky Hill to be engraved into my skin, but I sense that the powers that be prefer that I not remember the great uncles and aunts that poured into my foundation. They'd rather I see them as the black sheep of this family, as rabble-rousing renegades whose descent was the grenade hurled in the direction of policymakers. It always works best when the villains can paint the heroes as the antagonists, when the system can blame those who rail against it as the cause for calamity. I know my forefathers were not leading the charge, but they became casualties all the same. I never blame leaders for doing what leaders do. And I hope my present day folks are inspired by JAG's past, that they recognize resistance as an unwritten right in the student handbook, that they never cower in the presence of any campus personnel that calls for their silence, in the honor of ancestors they will never know and movement legends who will never be welcomed back with open arms. I pray that my people who cycle in and out my doors on a daily reject anything that suggests I was named after anything besides collective struggle or righteous intent or their best interests.
I was photographer for the newspaper on campus at the time. So I was following a lot of the things that was going on. And there were a series of protest meetings on campus. And also there were students, you know, would get together and have sessions in different parts of the campus, you know, talking about some of the administration people that they felt like wasn't up to what they needed as far as support for their community.
Edwin Edwards called it an accident, said if the students would have just protested peacefully and not been destroying property, everybody would have survived. Said they were damaging what belonged to the people of Louisiana. Said if they just kept their land grant receiving, historically disenfranchised mouths shut, eventually their concerns might be considered. My people did not get the memo calling for them to stand down as they were too busy rising up. My people coalesced as a consortium of big city uppity Negroes and fed up country bumpkins converging at the intersection of hell nah and not no more. My people knew their enemy did not exist in anonymity, but appeared caught off guard by an abundance of armored racists wielding weapons of mass destruction. My people brought a bullhorn to a gun battle, brought their outrage to a standoff against a militia. My people studied from textbooks that fed them half-truths, ate from dining halls that fed them insufficient meals, slept in dorms that were caving in. So my people assumed they had nothing to lose by remaining vigilant. But the funny thing about state-sanctioned violence, systemic racism, white supremacy, is its ability to rationalize wrong, to tell you it's there to protect you from your primal instincts, all while being the savage it names you as. So when my fellow HBC unions want to know why I have never petitioned for a name change, why I won't request a moniker not aligned with the mascot, I tell them I keep it Smith Brown to honor my forefathers, so that the powers that be never get confused about the cartage that catalyze how I will forever be identified. I need all sides to call me by the blood
The
sacrifice that begat the
Organizers
name I
of the
claim,
protest, a lot of those people
so that no
weren't
one ever
allowed to
forgets the
come back
blood
to
that fertilized the
university.
blood.
They
And the
were, they
revolution.
weren't allowed to come back to
Spark.
any school in the state. So, people were wondering, well, what happened to these people? And then we had to deal with the fact that we had lost 2 students. So, and that was a lot of things that, we just, at the time, wasn't used to having to deal with.
I was new to campus, and then I was just getting involved in different activities at Southern University. And so meantime, when I was there, at first I didn't get involved when they were talking about the boycott and things like that. It was getting stronger and stronger. Then finally, I got involved in just going to different meetings and stuff. Finally met one of the leaders, who was Fred Prejean. And Fred was a veteran, and other veterans we met would talk about the conditions at Southern University, food, inadequate teaching, inadequate housing facilities. And the president at that time was President Netherville, but he didn't have the students' interest at heart. They would always push them off. Like every time they come with grievances, student wasn't involved in it. Like it was his thing or no. He's like,
A lot of things that happen in history that have occurred. And I taught American history, a lot of stuff just didn't teach.
Yeah, and the other thing is, we didn't know, and we still don't know who escalated this and why they felt like it had to be escalated. And who would be the net beneficiary of the change.
Most people also don't know like why Southern University is where it is. Most people don't know why Southern University Law Center exists. But like people just, I feel like they don't care enough to know, first of all. And I don't think that we do a good enough job of educating ourselves on like true historical things. And I think when it comes up, it makes people very uncomfortable and they quickly want to shut it down.
And it made me realize in this environment of learning information, the more you learn, the more questions you're gonna have. The more doors you open about why this or that happened, the more questions are gonna pop up.
I never understood why they never put it out as if it was something to hide, because it's nothing that they did. It's nothing that is to be hidden. So I never understood why the information was never put out to us to study.
blood is on somebody's hands, but nobody wants to say who. You know what I'm saying? And so with that said, it's just like, for this to happen on our campus, and for me to be in Higgins Hall, you know what I'm saying, all day, every day for X amount of years and never learn about it, I'm hoping that somebody with Southern has something to do with it, that they just kind of keep it under wraps. And I mean, why else would you just put the plaque up and then not say anything and teach the kids anything about history that this institution that we're paying to be at and that we're living at?
My classmates were the sons and daughters of administrators from the campus. So they had information that I did not have. They had access to a background, a history of what had led up to this. And many of them, based upon, I would imagine, conversations that they had heard around their dinner tables or amongst their parents and their parents' friends, had come to conclusions about what had taken place, about who was right and who was wrong. And the overwhelming sense that I got was that the president of the university at the time, Dr. Netterville, had been complicit in causing this violence to break out.
It's kind of like in a Black family, one of those secrets that we're not proud of, so we don't talk about it enough.
Thank you all. That was blood on the bluff. So yeah, as we know, or as we can see, this history has multiple narratives to it. Many people have many stories to tell about this time, and it is my hope that this project, along with other projects and along with other articles, continues this very important narrative so that we never see history repeat itself. Appreciate y'all.
Now we're going to ask that our panel members join us up here on the stage. When they get seated, I'll reintroduce everybody. My name is Brandy B. Harris. I'm an SU alumna, and I'm the morning anchor at WBRZ. That's the ABC affiliate here in town. Set up. I'm just gonna quickly introduce everybody and say their names from far my right, your left, to the end. That's Denver Terrence. That's also an SU alumnus and the nephew of Denver Terrence. And of course, he's the founder of the Denver Smith Foundation. Then we have Dr. Valerie Urban. She's also an alumna, and she's the SU Counseling Center Director. And of course, we have world famous Mr. Ed Pratt, another alumnus, Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries Press Secretary and an award-winning. And we have Mr. Donnie Rose, who just made that wonderful presentation. And now we'll let that finish. It is 10:55, and the university would like to take a moment of silence to remember the tragic moment that happened on this campus 50 years ago, right now. So if everyone can just take a moment and bow their heads. Kind of piggyback on what Donnie talked about in his presentation, and I think I'm going to quote you. This is a cold case, not an urban legend. And if you attended this university, if you had family members who attended this university around that time or following that, you know the level of impact that this has had on our youth. And I think Ms. Shonda Wallace, is she going to be joining us on Zoom? We do have someone joining us on Zoom, so we'll kind of start the conversation here. Again, this is a cold case, not an urban legend. So Denver, I'm just going to start with you. I know you've really been leading the charge and starting this conversation. You have a foundation named after your uncle, and you share a name with your uncle. So let's start with, how has this shaped your life?
Thank you. Thank you, Brandy, for the question. So I'm named after my uncle, like Randy mentioned. So it's hard for me to imagine what life would be like without the story of my uncle and how he was killed. I think what it means to me is it always gave me that extra push and drive and do the best I can to make my family proud and in some ways make him proud and go just a little bit farther in keeping this name alive and continuing a legacy that I think.
All right, we're trying to make sure that the technical stuff is all together. We'll make sure we. Okay, so they're telling me I need to speak louder. So Denver, one more time. So talk to me about today, on 50 years since this moment that really has shaped your life. Do you think that this story has been told accurately and explained?
So from hearing from my family and other folks from firsthand account, there are some errors or things that were portrayed that were not accurate. Some of it I think is by accident. Some of it I think was intentional to not be at fault. And I think right now we have an opportunity within this occasion to hear from folks who were there, some of the student leaders like Mr. Hill here, who have a perspective that hasn't been told. And I think that is very important. And it's important to correct history. As I look out and see the young people here, it's important for them to know how they are able to benefit from the things that happened then, and also give them some guidance to continue to fight for the things that need to be fought for today.
And I'm gonna go back to Dr. Hill since he's just joining us. Good morning.
Good morning.
If you're not aware, that's Dr. Ricky Hill. He was a student here. He was a part of Students United. He was one of those student leaders who were having the conversations with administration that led up to or prior to this tragic day. So Mr. Hill, let's start with you. Do you think this story has been told accurately, or what would you like to correct?
No, it hasn't. It's never been told accurately. And I found myself, I was out there in the hall talking to other people who stopped me. And one guy asked me if I was a young man in the film out there. So I asked him if I was as great then as I am now. 50 years is a very long time. Time distorts things. Space distorts things. I've lived with this for 50 years. I am in large part who I am because of Southern University and the movement that we raised here on this campus. I'm from Bogalusa, Louisiana. I grew up in the civil rights movement. I came to Southern University 5 years after Black people in Bogalusa were shot and maimed, some were killed and so forth. Many of us who came to Southern University in the late 60s and right at 1970 came out of the civil rights movement, but not just came out of the movement, we were the fodder. Children who led that movement, were the fodder who led that movement. Children were. Many of us came from these places where Black people were struggling, just to change public life. So we come to Southern University and we come with hope and possibility that this place could help us move the sense that we had about the world forward. At the time, Southern was the largest Black university in the world. There were students here from most states in this country, many African countries, several Caribbean and Latin American countries. And we found our place in this sort of crucible. In this crucible, we wanted to be a crucible for change. There were all sorts of people who came through Southern during that time. This is at the end of the civil rights movement, and in many ways, the beginning of the Black liberation movement. All of us came, whether we came from Bogalusa or New Roads, where we came from, we came with these possibilities. We wanted to see a different world. And so when 1972 rolled around, the fall of 72, we had already been involved in many activities that attested to this. We had a sort of international zeal, if you will. In the spring of 1972, Some of us organized ourselves and chartered a bus and went down to Burnside, Louisiana, down between here and New Orleans, to protest the importation of Rhodesian chrome that was against UN sanction. Rhodesia was the country that the British, or the name that the British put on the country Zimbabwe. We went down to protest that. There were protests across many places across this country by college students against this importation. So we had an international sense. Some of us raised money and organized ourselves to attend the first national Black political conference that had been held in this country since the 1840s in Gary, Indiana. So we have been involved in a lot of activities. There were no Black elected officials. Nobody Black represented Scotlandville in the state government. Richard Turner becomes the first Black representative because of students at Southern University. The guy who used to direct this student union, Moran, became the first Black person to be on the East Baton Rouge School Board because of students at Southern University. We were involved in a lot of activities out there. We worked with a food cooperative, for example. I was a member of the Black Stone Society. When I got here, the students who were leading the Black Stone Society had changed it from the pre-law organization, which was named for the old jurist Blackstone, and they took the name Blackstone, which is one word, and they split the name up, Black Stone. We were the political organization on campus. When I walked on this campus, like every student, I looked around to see what I wanted to be involved in. And I was attracted to the Black Stone Society. It was the Black Stone Society that on October 16th, students in the psychology department came to, because we were known as the organization, that could raise some questions and get some things done. One of the things that we did on a regular basis was that we set up a microphone in front of the union on the other side, outside, to have students speak to any issue that they wanted to speak to. These students said this to us. Southern University had hired a young 26, 27-year-old chair, Charles Wardell. Back in 1970, there were not too many Black folk 26 years old with PhDs in this country, right? They hired him. They promised that they would give him what he needed to develop a first-rate department. Then they started systematically reneging. They also went over to LSU and got these white psychology professors and put them in the classroom over here, one of whom had developed a test to determine who was going to be in the behavior classes in public schools. Who you think were put in those behavior classes? Black folk. And then there were a lot of incidents of racism, according to the psychology student. They said, we want to organize against this. Let's go see the president say. They wanted to go over to the house here on campus. We said, no, President Netterville is not there. He hardly spends time in that house. He's at his house out in Southern Heights. So we get in the car to go to Southern Heights, knock on the door. His wife greets us, let us in. We tell President Netterville what our concerns are. He listens. He said, well, come by my office the next day. We do that by the next day. He began to back up. And so what we decided to do was to go to every department on this campus, to have all students go to every department to sit down with the faculty to talk about our concerns. We came up with an 83-page list of grievances, right? The faculty, and I want to emphasize this very, very clearly, the faculty had no voice on this campus, no voice at all. There was no faculty senate, there was no faculty assembly. The faculty couldn't even decide, for the most part, what ought to be in the curriculum. We at Southern were no different from students at any of these schools in the late 60s and early 70s. We wanted relevance. We wanted our education to be relevant to the lives that we were living out here. We wanted it to be relevant to the possibilities that we saw. And so we came up with these big ideas. Sure, there were some things in there about the dormitory and the cafeteria, but our big ideas were these. I'm trying to move real quick here. Our big ideas were these. So the university had an agriculture department. Why couldn't it use that department and expertise to help people get better food? So the university had an architect department. Why couldn't it design and build and help build affordable housing for Black people? So the university had a social sciences department. Why couldn't it help Black people think through these questions? We're the largest Black university in the world. People from everywhere. So we believe naively, idealistically, hopefully, that the university could be this beacon of possibility. So we come to the university out of these struggles. We come to the university looking for answers. We come to the university looking for guidance. Now what we didn't understand, because we came to know that Southern was not going to tell its history truthfully, what we didn't understand a great deal was how Southern came to be. This campus came here in 1914, but it first started in New Orleans, in the Tulane University area. Okay? And by 1914, according to the history, I don't know whether they tell you this in your freshman orientation or not. The white folks in the area got tired of having black people living up there. So they went and pressured the legislature and the white powers that be to move that campus out of that Tulane area. And they identified the plantation in Baton Rouge called Scott Bluff, where we are sitting right now. And they brought this campus here. And if you know anything about Scotlandville right now, then you would have known pretty much the same thing about Scotlandville 50 years ago. So, and then let me also make this point too. And this is very, very critical because colorism existed on this campus. Now we defied it, but it existed, right? It existed because it existed from the very beginning. When PBS Pinchback and Theophile Allain and others who were the black members of the Louisiana Constitutional Convention of 1879, and you have to understand something about that. After slavery, Reconstruction occurs, right? It lasts for roughly 10 years. They don't want black people to have power. In all of these states in the South, black people were for the most part, the majority. And we had power, voting power. They didn't want that. So they convened Constitutional Convention to overturn the Constitution, to come up with Constitution that would enshrine racial segregation. PBS Pinchback and others said, we want an institution for higher education for people of color. What they had in mind was not people who had been slaves, not real slaves. They had in mind free people of color. And you have to understand that free people of color were technically not slaves. So colorism had been enshrined in the university. By the time I got here in 1970, Southern had 3 presidents: a father, Joseph Samuel Clark, a son, Elton Clark, and G. Leon Netterville, who was tied to that family. Some of you now may have heard recently that another founder of the university had been one of the slaves who the priest from Georgetown University sold to people in Louisiana, in Southwest Louisiana, for $115,000, named Jones. One of his descendants becomes the president of Grambling, Ralph Waldo Emerson Jones. Some of you may have heard of that name. So now we actually know that there is this connection. That's part of Southern's history. So we came in here trying to understand all of it. We didn't know it then. We didn't understand a lot of it then, but we came in trying to understand all of that. So the university had a law school here. Civil rights activities were going on out there. People needed lawyers, right? We were looking at all the stuff that we had here, and we believed in our youthful, idealistic way that the university would be forthcoming to use this expertise. So we put together our grievances to try to address these big issues. And we got resistance. That was a lot of meetings. I went through the chronology last night. There's a lot of meetings that we had back and forth. I can assure you that of several things about us as students. We always acted in good faith, number one. Number two, we were not a fringe group. We chose Students United because we wanted all the students being involved, because we knew that the university would say, oh, this is just a few disgruntled students. So we chose Students United and said that all the students were united. We had boycotts every day for a month of 80 to 90% of the student body. Next, we never took over building on this campus. We never had any weapons. We never did anything violent. But by October 27th, they start bringing police on this campus. And we go to court, it all comes out in the court. The FBI agent who testifies tells us that they planned the night that Nate Howard and I got arrested on November 9th. We had a rally planned for that next day. They had planned to come on this campus at that rally and arrest all of us. I'm quoting the FBI agent, because they believed that if they had gotten their heads in front of all the students, they would give up. People would just simply walk away. What they also did not count on was that those of us who were the core leaders were among the best students on this campus. And we also represented disciplines across the campus. I was in political science. Fred Prejean was in business. Herget Harris was in engineering. Charlene Hartnett was in psychology. Nate Harris was in mathematics. Nate Harris was a math genius. He was supposed to have come to Southern. He had been accepted at Yale University. I had already started at Loyola University before I came to Southern. Back in 1970, if you go back and study the history on this, back in late 69 and 70, these white universities were trying to do the affirmative action thing, right? So they were recruiting Black students. I had been on this campus in the summer of 1969 as a member of Bayou Boy State. That was a Bayou Boy State and Bayou Girl State held over here in Southern. LSU hosted Boy State and Girl State. The students who came to Bayou Boy State and Bayou Girl State were said to be the most accelerated students in the state. I get to Loyola after cutting short my summer vacation and work out in Los Angeles. I get to Loyola early August. I knew almost everybody who was there because I had met them the summer before on this campus. What they wanted to do was to see, although they said we were accelerated, they wanted to see if we could read or write, right? If we could compensate and so forth. So the first week, by that Thursday, I'm sitting out in one of the courtyards on the campus reading something, and one of these priests comes by, and he speaks, and he calls me buddy. And that just cut right through me. Why did it cut right through me? I'm sure everybody uses the word buddy here and there, because when I grew up, if a white person called you buddy, it was the same thing as calling you boy. If they call you boy and buddy, it was the same thing as calling you nigga. And everything just flooded to me because I had come out of high school, my last year in high school, I had to deal with the first year of fully desegregation. I had to deal with both white students, the white principal, and the white students every day about their racism. And I said, no, I can't do this no more. I'm not gonna go to college and do this another year, another 2 years. So I called my mother and said, look, I'm coming home. I'm gonna find a way to get into Southern University. I got into Southern 2 weeks before classes started. So some of us could have gone elsewhere, but I come out of this movement. Some of the people come out of this movement. So we saw Southern as this beacon for these possibilities. But we get here and we find resistance. We get here and we have to reluctantly conclude, well, Southern is just part of the system, right? And we were against the system. So we knew the system was not going to change. And so what we put forward were things that we believe was going to enhance not just the students, not just the faculty, but Scotlandville and Black folk in Baton Rouge and East Baton Rouge Parish in Louisiana and across this country and the world. So we conducted ourselves at every step in good faith. I know there have been some conversation. I mentioned this earlier this morning that your uncle, Leonard Brown, you can see the pictures out there on the wall. I can show you Leonard at the rally. I didn't know Denver Leonard personally well no more than they knew me personally well, but if you were on Southern's campus during this time, and anybody who was here, I think will attest to this. If you were on this campus as a student, even though you may not have known everybody, you knew who was a student at Southern and who was not. We congregated not just in that room over there playing cards, but we also was involved in every idea and issue that was about here.
Dr. Hill,
I'm
sorry.
sorry.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
So my only point here is very simple, is that we conducted ourselves not just civilly, but we were very clear about what we were attempting to do to move Southern University forward.
Dr. Hill's a chairman of political science, and obviously he still remembers it very well. And they were very, very organized, which is something that I talked to Mr. Ed Pratt about shortly before we started. You kind of painted a picture there, Dr. Hill, of this campus was different back then. At that time, 50 years ago, there were about 9,000 students. We know that at the time, Southern only got about 57% of the same amount of funding per student that LSU got. We know that you were a freshman as a result of the things that they were requesting of the university. Some of those things did happen. Southern has its own board of supervisors now. Some of that funding gap is closed somewhat. Obviously, there's still a lot of underfunding. So Mr. Pratt, tell me about how this started your college career. I know you write a column every year about how it shaped it and how we need to remember it. What do you remember about the changes after this?
Well, to talk about the changes, and thank you, Dr. Hill, as always, about what it was like coming here. And then I'll get to it. Hopefully I'll get to it very quickly. When I came here in 1972, Southern was a different set of circumstances. You could get an associate degree here. So you had an older campus, and you had people that come back from Vietnam. You had people who had worked in civil rights, other places. You had people who come back to get their associate degree so they could get a leg up where they were working. So you had 27-year-old, 28-year-old, 25-year-old, and you had 18-year-old. And when I came on campus, it was this first time I had ever seen this group of people from Los Angeles, New York, Seattle, Washington, Houston, Texas. They were from everywhere, and they were Africans here, everything. You had not seen that. I come out of South Baton Rouge, we hadn't seen much of anything. So when we got up here, this was like this, oh my God, this is great. And you heard people with accents and stuff like that, and it was an amazing place to be for somebody 18 years old. Well, we witnessed these demonstrations that were happening on campus. So you're sort of like, you don't know exactly what they're talking about, but you want to be interested in it. So you walked around the campus, went to some of the meetings they had. They had a couple meetings in the men's gym, a big meeting there in the men's gym where you said the president was there and some Fred Prejean, some other student leaders, Ms. Hartnett was there. And so we sit and watch that. Then they have the demonstrations that, stop class. And sometimes, I remember one time being in class, it was like a class of normally 26, 27 students. And we were in Harris Hall, and there were like 12 there that day. And so you saw the demonstration where people were walking down the main street on campus. So you sort of get the feel something is changing, and we want to listen to what these student leaders want to do. And it was a lot to take in at 18 years old. So, and I'm gonna give this thing about that day that everything just went south. That day, you had to sort of slip on campus because they had National Guard out there by the hump. They had National Guard on the men's gym, and they were around the men's gym. And then they were blocking off some of the street when you come on the other street over there, they come on campus. So you sort of slipped in. And we were in the union, me and a couple of my friends were in the union, that's where people went. We didn't even know at that time what was happening on the back of the campus. We had word that something was going on there, but we really didn't know. So we sit there, and I mentioned Mr. This guy comes in, and Mr. Hill, Dr. Hill gave me his name. His name was Sababu. His real name is what? Surgeon Harris. All right. Well, he came in there, he had a military helmet on, and he yanked the plug out of the jukebox. There was a jukebox in the union. And he said, he stood on the table and said, we need as many students as possible to the back to show support for what we're doing. So we get it, okay, fine, we go to the back. And by the time we get halfway there, we could see something was totally out of whack. There were dozens and dozens of state troopers and people from the sheriff's office. And there was this giant thing called Big Bertha. And Big Bertha was a thing where officers could be inside and shoot from inside of this thing. It was a big tank looking thing. And so that gets your attention. So when we got down close to where everything was going on, we were just standing there. And we're listening, we're looking, and then there was some tear gas goes out from the side where the officers were. And that was from, if I recall right, from my face the left of the administration building. And so it goes out there toward the other students who were in the other direction. Well, from what I found out later, it was a state trooper that did that. And so anyway, the students rolled the thing back to him. and then all hell breaks loose. Then you see fire, you see tear gas going, you hear sounds like rifle fire, I don't know. But it was just lots of sound going on. And you're watching, and people are running here and there. And it wasn't long, maybe I can't say it was a minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, whatever. The two people are laying on the ground, but there's a lot of commotion. So the first thought was these people got trampled, but that wasn't what had happened. You stay there a little bit longer, and then you see what happened. But then they start turning tear gas, they start shooting tear gas everywhere. So I had two friends of mine that I went to McKinley with, Carolyn Bell and Darrell Castle. Well, we took off and we started running toward the other part of the campus, to get off campus. That day, what I can tell you, 18 years old, two people that were not violent. Anyway, matter of fact, there was no violence. There was no violence anywhere, either from students that were near the administration building, anywhere. There was no violence, no threats to anybody. But to go back home, and there was a basketball court near where I lived. And that was like the church. You went to the basketball court every day. And we went over there, and everybody wanted to know what happened. And then we were listening. People had transistor radios. No, we had no phones and all that. People had transistor radios, and they were listening to what was going on, the stories. And then when you really understood that the students had died, it affected I was crushed. I didn't know them. I was a nobody on campus, but it affected me so much that these students had gotten killed. But then the lies came out that one from the sheriff's office said there were 2,000 students there. I don't know about that. Then they said they were threatened by students. That didn't happen. Then they said maybe a student had a weapon in the administration building. That didn't happen. It was them. One of them fired at the students and killed the students. Now, I have a hard time thinking about if you're doing tear gas, how do you hit somebody in the head? That's kind of hard for me to visualize how that could happen. But anyway, they were killed. And the emotion, it gripped the Black community here. There was anger, but you just sort of exploded inside. I'm 18. I become a journalist. I became one of the writers and the assistant editor of the Digest newspaper here before I left. And I went on to work at the paper and all of that. Well, over the past 50 years, I've written a number of columns about my feelings that day, and they've changed from time to time how I felt. But the anger and the wrath that I had, and of those people around me, has been there forever. And people say, well, I'm glad you're bringing that up, and I didn't know about it, and stuff like that. The sad part of that is there were students who told me that. Students here. That was shocking. I had somebody from LSU said they were 20 years old on the LSU campus. Glad you brought that up. I'm glad you made that clear to me, because I didn't really know what happened. Two things happened there. One, if they didn't know about it, that's bad. Two, they didn't care about it. And three, why didn't they, when it happened, they didn't care on the campus. They were just like, okay, that happened at Southern, that's okay. It is so devastating to have the feeling that I have. I was not a student leader. I was a nobody. But it just took away something to me that meant so much to be on this campus. All these people I met, all this culture that was coming to me. We had just come out of the civil rights movement, and all this stuff was going on. I loved this university. I loved everything about when I was going. I loved this place. And then I had to make a decision after the killing. Would I come back? I could go to LSU. I don't know how I was gonna pay for it, but I was gonna try to find a way, or I could go somewhere else so I can go find a job. But my heart was here. My heart was in the back of that campus. My heart was in the Union. My heart was in Harris Hall. My heart was in the library, which I spent way too much time. And my heart was everywhere on this campus. I had to come back. And my friends who were with me that day, they thought about what they were gonna do. We talked. There was a lot of us from McKinley who were up here that day. And every last one of us came back. We talked about it. This was Mecca. This was Mecca for a young Black person trying to learn something about life, about education, about so much, and I had to come back here. And it never left me what happened in the back of that campus. And it's, I guess I should let it go after 50 years. But when year 51 comes by, I won't let it go. When year 52 comes, I won't let it go. And 53, I won't let it go. I will always feel for those two brothers because it just wraps around me. It wraps around my head. And I wish there was a time when the name Smith Brown was tossed around to be the name of the F.G. Clark Activity Center. That was tossed around one time, but that got put away and they put it here. And I hope that we should have something called freshman orientation. When I came on campus, that was a class you took to learn about the history of Southern University. You learned the alma mater. You did all of that, and you learned about the people that were with you in that class and where they came from. The future Miss Southern was in that class. We made her, I remembered her when she started running for Miss Southern when I was a senior. And I went out there and tried to get people to vote for her. She became Miss Southern because I met her. She was from somewhere in Texas, and about as country as you can get. But she got some style on her after she had been here a while, because that's what Southern can do. I've gone too longer than I thought, but I just said that had such a profound effect on me. My wife will tell you that. My son, my daughter will tell you that. They know, because I always thought, and I wish the freshmen come. I don't know if y'all have that anymore, but you learn the history of the university, and you learn that those are more than just two faces that you see there. You learn about the history, and you learn about them, the student leaders who were here. And I hope that's something that's being taught. If it's not, it ought to be. And I love this university, and it just meant so much to me then, and it means so much to me now. And I wish, I can't express in the right words of how I feel every time, but if you see me, if you read the Advocate on the week leading up to November 16th, I will have a column there, and I've done several of them. It doesn't match with everybody, it matches with me. All right.
And we're going to come back to that column in just a bit, because you said something that I think is important. You know, they're not just faces. I know that we know that the union is named the Smith Brown Memorial Union. We see their pictures out there. There's now a beautiful display out in the hall for you to learn more about what happened on this campus 50 years ago. But that's somebody's family. That's two people's family. They were not just immortalized faces that'll be 20 years old forever. They have family members who love and miss them dearly and have been deeply affected by that. And if you've been watching on the screen, we do have someone joining us on Zoom. That's Miss Shonda Wallace. That's Leonard Brown's daughter. She was a very young infant when her father tragically was killed on this campus. Shonda, good morning. I just want to give you the opportunity to speak to everyone here. I know that this had to have affected you tremendously, because you never really got that opportunity to know your father. And he too, like I just said, has been immortalized kind of in your mind as a 20-year-old that you never really got to know. Can you just elaborate on how this event really affected you?
Good morning. Thank you for this. This is greatly needed. It has affected me. It affects me today. I turned 50 August
Hold on
the
just a
10th.
second, Shonda. We're gonna make sure we got the audio right for you. Shonda, we're gonna come right back to you.
Okay.
So let's just talk about it, Denver. Like I just said, you know, I know you've been named after your uncle. He's kind of immortalized in your mind as this 20-year-old. You know, how has this affected mental health? How has this affected you, your family? I know it changed them forever.
Most definitely. So, and going back to the question you asked Ms. Wallace about, you know, her father. One of the things that I think is important too is to make that human connection. My uncle died before I was born. And listening to the few stories that my family have been able to tell about him, I think it's important to like know that this was a beloved person who had a very bright future, who was a math whiz, who was always willing to help others. And it's not just, like you said, a name or an occasion. And this was a real human being who was surrounded by people who loved him, and it has definitely impacted them. Touching on the issue of mental health, this is something that we all go through at different levels. Trauma of losing a brother and a loved one.
What's happening?
The trauma of losing a brother and a loved one in this way, extremely traumatic. What adds to that trauma is the lack of justice, accountability, apology. And I think that we've done a few things that led towards what's just has a long way to go when it comes to justice for Edward Smith and Linda Brown. And so my family, I'm quite sure, have suffered through mental trauma because of this incident. And one of the things that I think would be helpful in a way is for them to be able to, seek or get some closure in a way that could help in improving their mental health. That another thing too that I think with connections with incidents like this and through our history, recent history, we've seen more Black people being killed on camera, and I'm concerned that we are a little bit desensitized by it. And I think hopefully it never comes to the point where we accept it as a normal thing or something we should just, it's another one and we should just move on. These people have the same family and loved ones wrapped around them that we need to, take very serious.
And I know you said that your family didn't talk about your uncle very much, but can you share one thing about him that maybe we don't know outside of his major and that kind of stuff? Something about him as a person.
So one of the things that I've heard about him as a person was one that he was very good at math. And that he was, he would be willing to help other students with their math and things like that. One of the other things too that I've heard that he was always willing to help other people. So, my Aunt Josephine talks about how he was encouraging her as a student here at Southern to, work hard and continue with her studies. And I heard my dad tell stories about the conversations that he had with him about encouraging him to shoot the ball more on the basketball court and things like that. So he was always an encourager and willing to help others.
Be your best self. I like that. That's a nice way to remember him and not just the tragedy that happened here 50 years ago. So that's a nice sentiment. And we know that, and I know, Mr. Pratt, you kind of touched on this, that why don't people remember it the right way? Kent State gets remembered all the time. I've just learning about this over the last few years, learned about the shooting at Jackson State 2 years before and making those connections. Just in the past 2 days, we've seen shootings on college campuses, obviously not under the same sort of set of circumstances, but still tragedies that are worth being remembered. Do y'all see the connection between the struggle then and the continued struggle for Black liberation now, specifically on the campus of HBCU? Donnie, I'm gonna let y'all go one.
Yeah, I think that, and one thing I was talking to some folks about with respect to this idea of the reason why this history has to be prevalent and in our face is to try to circumvent anything like this from ever happening again. Specifically, and I'll point to my generation. So I came to Southern in 1998. I was here between 1998 and 2003, late Gen X. So my generation was more or less the generation of young people who came on the back end of middle-class aspirational Black America. By the time we got here, we had folks on campus that were definitely, kind of radical and about that life. But by the time we had got here, we were kind of almost, I don't want to say a complicit generation, but we were not as radicalized as the generation that came before us. With that being said, the young people who are on campus right now, when you put it into like the continuum, these young people literally have grown up in the era of Black Lives Matter. They have grown up in an era of watching, as mentioned before, as Denver mentioned, Black folks be massacred on film, and so they're radicalized in a different way. They've taken on their own levels of movement and just like spearheading like liberation energy. So the reason why I mentioned all that to kind of tie this point in, it is critical that this history be foregrounded and be intentionally mentioned, because you're dealing with a generation of young people that's not like my generation. They are more akin to the generation of folks like Dr. Hill, more akin to the generation of folks like Mr. Pratt, with respect to like being mobilized and really like about that action. And, they definitely are more likely to call out a power dynamic, to speak truth to power. And so it is just essential that we do not bury this story or bury the truth. I asked someone when I was doing interviews for Blood on the Blood, a common question I asked everyone I interviewed was, what do you think would happen? Unfortunately, God forbid, if a situation similar to 1972 happened in this day and age. And pretty much everyone told me across the board that all hell would break loose. And what they were referring to is that, again, young folks now who have grown up in a different era, who have grown up at a time where they're no longer necessarily believing the lies or the myths of middle-class aspiration equaling liberation that maybe my generation did, right? They've moved beyond that because they've seen something different. And so, again, it's just super critical that this information is foregrounded. And I think my last kind of point to conclude, I feel like, and I've expressed this, that for a long time, the university may have struggled to get a grip on its narrative about what happened on November 16th, 1972. So I'm appreciative for this forum and what's going on now, because at the end of the day, the culpability does not exist among people who are currently on campus as administrators or people who are currently the board of supervisors. Like, none of these people are currently culpable for what took place at that time. The people that we could point a finger at are gone. You know what I mean? Edwin Edwards is gone. You know what I mean? There people in his, like, these people are no longer around. And so I think that in moving forward, we do have to fully embrace whatever mistakes that may have been made, and do what we need to do to rectify, that type of thing from ever happening again, and just allowing space for student advocacy, student voice, and, letting our young people be the sounding board we need to make the greatest Southern university we can. So if they're saying that there's something that's not right, not to be dismissive of that and to be corrective.
Thank you, Donnie. And I think we have corrected Shonda's audio. Ms. Wallace, can you hear us? Can we hear you?
I can hear you. Good morning. Can you hear me?
There we go. We got you nice and clear. So let's going back to that question I asked you a few minutes ago. You never really got an opportunity to get to know your father. Again, this is Leonard Brown's daughter. She was a young infant when her father was tragically killed. What do you remember about that, and how has this event, this tragic event, shaped your life?
As Denver talked about, the family rarely talked about this. My grandmother was very much affected. His siblings was affected. It was a hush. If you talked about it, it brought out emotions. My uncle, his oldest brother, passed in January of last year, and he still, before then, could not talk about it. It brought tears. For me, I do have, as you say, mental health problems because I wonder, where would I have been? You know, my dad was a great man, they said. He loved people. He loved helping people. He was there for his family. He was there for me. The weekend before he got killed, it must have been something in him because he kept me all weekend. My grandmother said he would not let anybody else hold me, change me, do anything. He did everything. So to me, this is repeating. This is a repeat cycle. It's like when I see things that happen to Breonna Taylor and stuff, I get shook up again. I have a 18-year-old daughter I would not allow to go to Southern University because I am still tragically, emotionally affected by this. It is something that I will never forget.
Just to kind of touch on that, which I definitely want to hear from Mr. Hill and Mr. Pratt on this, you know, from all the research, from all of the stories that have been done, university definitely took some missteps. So what are some of the things that you think about now, 50 years since then, of what you would like from Southern University? Would an apology be enough?
An apology. I understand that the people that are not at Southern are not the people like Edwin Edwards that did it, but they are the people that continue to tell the lies and not get the truth out. Because there are people on this campus don't even know what Smith and Brown stand for. You need to tell the story in order to understand. You're walking on the grounds of Smith and Leonard. My dad paid away. He died. He sacrificed his life. And we're not telling the story. You got to tell the story in order for people to understand and tell the truth behind it. For my grandmother, I would like an apology because she never got it. No one ever said, I'm sorry, Miss Brown, that your son was killed. All you had to say was, I don't understand. I didn't know, but not continue the lie that was told around the campus. And when I tell my daughter this story, I try to tell her the truth. I try to show her pictures of her grandfather. I try to keep his memory up because I'm a loving, caring person. I'm in the nursing field. I take care of people every day. I have empathy. And I want everybody else to know when they come in as a freshman, tell them why this is happening. Tell them why you're allowed to come here and be free to do the things that you do. I had a niece graduate from LSU and somebody was asking her, oh, that was your uncle? What does that mean? And I'm like, no one is telling the story. In order to understand and to get it right, we got to tell the truth and tell the story. We got to keep their name alive. And I understand that a lot of things, has transpired. I just want the story told. I want it to mean something because blood was shed.
Dr. Hill, you were here on this campus. You were a big part of everything that led to what happened on November 16th in 72. What do you think of the missteps the university has made, and how do you think that can be corrected 50 years later?
Well, I certainly agree with her, no question about that. This is what I've been saying all year. This is why I'm urging these students to go and learn this history. Southern has not told its history. It has not wanted to tell this history. The reason why Jackson State, for example, and I taught at Jack State and was an academic administrator, Jack State tells its history. Jack State brings its students in and have them embrace that history. Kent State was out there long before Jack State, though they happened during the same period of time. But Kent State has told that history. Now Kent State is white. So Southern has, first of all, faced up to its own history. It hasn't done that. I think that is very, very important because as has been mentioned, when we look at, I see a continuum, if you will, between the killings of Denver and Leonard in 1972 and all the killings that have occurred. These killings are not random. They're not arbitrary. This is the way the system is. So if you think about this, in 2024, we would have been in a 10-year period of Black people, unarmed Black people being killed by the state, by the police, right? So we have to tell this history. Southern has to, first of all, face up to its history. It has to want to tell that history. I think that it has to do something quite concrete. While those people may be dead, they no longer here, Southern University is still culpable because it was culpable for its involvement. Again, as I said, it's part of the system. So I think that Southern needs to do some concrete things. The Smith and Brown family need to be, we are living in a society where you compensate people when they are harmed physically or civilly by a system of compensation, right? People need to be compensated. These families need to be compensated, right? Those of us who were banned from this campus, the state court needs to remove this ban, and we need to symbolically at least be given our degrees. I just found out on Sunday. That Fred Prejean, the charge was dropped against him. I never knew that, right? I thought all this time that Fred Prejean got his degree from Xavier. I found out a decade ago, he got his degree from Southern University, right? Now, I know how this thing has gone down, right? You know, I know how some of these administrators regarded me, right, as the radical one, because I've taught these people. Last time I saw E.C. Harrison at a conference in Houston, right? I knew what his conversation was going to be about, and he wanted to act like nothing had happened, right? So Southern can do something concrete. Southern also get the state of Louisiana to do something concrete. Compensate these families for their loss. That's not going to bring them nothing back. I know that. But in this capital society, that's the way things are done. We have to demand that, right? We also have to demand that Southern, once again, tell the truth about itself. One I found a comment to the port here. I came in, I did not catch the beginning, but 50 years came back to me. Because what you were doing up here, Southern University in the 60s and 70s had one of the best English departments in this country. That was a port, a national known port named Pinky Lane. You may know that name, right? There was another port named Warwell, who at that time edited Callaloo, right? They got every student who wanted to be involved in poetry. That was an annual spring art festival on this campus. Poetry, music, theater, and the whole 9 yards. So when I walked in and saw you and heard you doing that, it took me back there, because I know we use the word spoken word now, but the phrase spoken word now, but poetry was very important to what went on back then. We could distill our concerns and so forth in poetry, and they allowed that, they enabled us to do that every spring. And if you go back and find some of those poems were reflective of what was going on during this period of time. That was important. It is still important today. Once again, for Southern University to use its resources to empower these students, because it's going to matter out here in the world. I just didn't walk out of here and say, I'm going to get a PhD, right? I mean, something went on here that helped me. I ended up getting my degree from at Atlanta University. I studied under three faculty members who had been Southern graduates, one of whom had been kicked out in the late 1950s. Two of whom had been involved in the early 60s struggle. And they just simply passed on stuff to me and others. And several of us from the SUNO campus ended up at Atlanta University. Most of the students who got there at that time in the mid-70s had come out of these struggles. So you need to tell the history, you need to face up to it, and you need to concretely compensate these families as well as those of us who were banned from this campus. To be banned from something is not a good feeling, right? I've been a Bantu for a long time. You know, I've lived a lot of different places, right? But I never lose sight of where I come from. So, and it's personally for me, I mean, it really, in the family, it probably don't matter whether they live for band or not. I am who I am, but I think that the university is obligated to face up to its culpability. So I agree with Leonard's thought on it.
And Dr. Hill, I'm sure I speak for a lot of Southern University graduates. I know I speak for Donnie and Denver. You were part of the Southern University family, regardless of that symbolic gesture from the university. And we love and respect everything that you did on this campus.
Everything I'm saying here, let me just say this, please. I'm speaking on behalf of the core leaders. We've had 2 weeks of Zoom conversation. Charlene Shakari Hartnett, Herjit Sababu, Harris, and Nate Howard. Fred Prejean died a couple of years ago almost now. Paul Shavers, people don't talk about Paul Shavers. Paul Shavers was a football star on the football team. Think about that. And that's another big point about that. I won't make it now because I'm going to be calling the time thing.
Dr. Valerie Irvin, that's the director of the SU Counseling Center. You're listening to these people talk.
Yeah.
And you're hearing the passion. You're hearing how Dr. Hill, it's like it's jogging his memory just having this conversation. You're hearing from Ms. Wallace of how this has affected her life. As a counseling director, how do you think events like this, specifically this one, has affected the university community's mental health on this particular?
Well, I actually came to Southern 2 years after the killing of Smith and Brown. And I do know the story. My brother is one of the guys in the barbershop who probably cut your hair. And so I did learn the story because I kind of hung out in the barbershop.
Rolling your brother?
Yes.
Rolling with my boy. Yeah.
Yeah, so I knew what had happened. But what I've heard over and over and over is collective struggle and then collective trauma. This was a collective trauma. The entire university campus was traumatized that day, whether they were there at the administration building or not. And then you couple that with generational. A couple of people have mentioned the ongoing shootings, murders that we've been seeing since George Floyd. I can't imagine that when something like that happens, the Smith and Brown family don't reflect back to what happened to their loved one. It happens over and over and over. So the deal with grief and healing is that, yes, you must speak their name. Pratt, you shouldn't stop doing what you're doing. And I would encourage all of the family members. It's saddening that it is so difficult for her family to not talk about her dad, their brother, their son, because part of healing is that you have to figure out how you keep your loved ones involved in your daily life. It's important to continue to include them in whatever you're doing. So he's named after his uncle. That was his mom's way of commemorating her brother. So it is important to continue while you're healing. You've got to be able to talk about them and what happened. And yes, it is it's essential that the truth be told. It's unfortunate that, we know in our community, we really don't speak much about mental health. But the fact of the matter is, I can't imagine anyone that was involved in 1972 that you've not dealt with anxiety and depression. You've had to, because you were traumatized again that day. And when we look at anxiety as a professional, what I know is that annually I'm seeing about 19 million people are affected by anxiety every year. So anxiety and depression are two of the most common mental health disorders we address in our field. And again, this was a community trauma. And so I don't know what happens to you, Pratt, physiologically, but I'm willing to bet when you're reflecting back, there's some stuff happening in the body, because we know that oftentimes our emotions are trapped inside of us. So what we teach students is to learn what your triggers are, learn where your emotion is in your body so that you can address that appropriately. My wish for both, again, of the families is that you continue to say their name. In our culture, we talk about call and response. That's not just on the church stuff. You need to do that with people that you've lost and you love. You have to continue to include them in your lives.
And that's a great way to transition to my last question here. What can we learn from this? Obviously, we need to relearn, make sure that we're teaching the accurate details of what happened, what led to this. And I really want to hear from everybody. Let's start with Shonda. Shonda, what do you think we as a university community, as a Southern family, what can we learn from commemorating this day and from those events in 1972?
We learned that sacrifice, empathy, love, communicating, being open, being able to tell the truth, being a family, A family is just not the people that make up your family, friends, co-workers, people you pass by. We're all a family. We're all in this together. And I think this has just, it's been exciting for me because this is the first time that I've even been invited to anything. And I'm 50 years old. So I just want to start the healing process, talk about it, keep their name. I tell my daughter every day, if your grandfather was here, you would be very spoiled even more because he loved everybody. Just keep saying their names and telling the story.
Thank you so much, Shonda. Donnie?
I think one thing that we have to always remember is that when young people come to college, there's a multitude of learnings taking place. It's not just what's happening in the classroom, it's what's happening in the union, it's what's happening at the football game, it's what's happening at the Greek parties, it's all of these kind of multitudes of learning. And so with that being the case, you have to recognize when young people are saying something that is interfering with their learning process. So if that's something that's happening at the university level, at the state level, any cause of disruption to their learning, you have to attune to that. We don't even get to this moment if the young people of 1972 were actively listened to, if their demands were adequately met, if state personnel, if university personnel were forthright in helping everything that they wanted to get resolved. And so I think that, you know, for me, one of the biggest learning lessons outside of, you know, transparency about what happened is remembering that young people that come to college, literally, like the old show says, it's a different world from where you're coming from. They literally are converging onto a campus with a multitude of things that they're taking in and learning. One of those things being advocacy and self-efficacy, right? If you are not honoring that as a university, you will continue to fail the young people that come to your campus. It does not matter if you give them scholarships. It does not matter if you give them diplomas. If you're not honoring the holistic student, you're failing them. And so I just want to say this in closing because I mentioned this in my piece. There's a line where I said something about that I wish that the university would enshrine the names of people like Fred Prejean and Dr. Ricky Hill. I was completely not anticipating seeing Dr. Hill here, right? And so I'm beyond humbled and honored and heartwarmed that he is here, because there never should have been a situation in which he should not have been able to be here, right? And so, you know, we got to give room for student voice, student advocacy, because, you know, and I'll say this and close to all of the SU administrators in the building, this university will only be as great as the young people who attended and as the young people that helped shape what it will be.
Mrs. Pratt, what do you think? I mean, I know you write an article, and again, y'all don't take an opportunity to Google his article, opinion article that he writes in the Advocate every year. It's always very strongly worded, and it definitely makes you reflect on what happened up here 50 years ago. So, Mr. Pratt, what can we all learn?
Well, thank you. I think, and I agree with Mr. Rose here. You have to listen to the student. And I think a good idea would be to talk to your freshman students after they finish their first semester and talk to them about get an idea of what they think the university needs to do, what that first semester was like. But you also should talk to the seniors who are leaving and get an idea, how has this university affected you? What do you think this university could do better? And I think that would be something that could happen every year. And I think you would come and get a good knowledge of how this university stands. Because an 18-year-old telling you something and a 22, 23, 24-year-old telling you something, that's a different thing. It's about who walk the path. I think that's important. I hope the university, and I may be stepping over my path here, but I, you know, I hear a young lady talking about her daughter is 18 and she would not send her to Southern. I wish Southern would put pressure on her and say, we'll give your daughter a scholarship and say, and we'll give you a scholarship. That's up to her not to, but I think it would be great for the university to do this. And I think it would speak volumes to the students that are on the campus now, students who have left the campus, say, this is what the university has done. And I think that should be a thing where we reach out to, the university reach out to the families of both Smith and Brown and see what they could do to help those families here. And scholarships or whatever, and bring them back here some sort of way. Also, the other thing is, when you say listen to the folk who are around the campus and all of that, have the university administrators go out and just have a conversation with someone, go in the union, go to one of the classrooms. It's not bad to go to the psychology class and say, hey, I'm president of the university. You know, give me 15 minutes. Let's talk about what my goals are. How do they fit with your goals? And I think those things would be great to do. So University Board of Supervisors, don't come once a month for the meeting. Come out on the campus and go out there and listen to the students and talk to, and not just talk to the students, talk to the faculty. Get an idea what the faculty wants to do, because the faculty has ideas too. And they have to have a venue to express that, not just at board meetings, but just in a relaxed atmosphere. And if you get that information over a period of time, then you can see some changes that you may want to bring to the university. One thing in myself, you know, like I said before, I've done this, I don't know how many columns I've written. Somebody on the Board of Supervisors said, could you give us a copy, give us some of your columns? Well, I'm gonna do that. And I hope that some kids and some students up here will read some of those columns. But I think my columns only speak only part of what I feel. And I hope there would be times maybe with some freshmen or something like that, Dr. Hill or somebody else could go and talk to them about what has happened, why it happened, and why it should not happen again, and that sort of thing. And I think both of us have a thing, we love the hell out of Southern University. I think that just was clear. And people that love the university should be able to talk to students about this university more often than this thing. And I love this thing. I really love the fact that the university is doing this. I think this is great. And I applaud everybody who put this together. But I just think that the biggest thing is to work with the students, talk to them about what's going on and how things can change and what they would like to see change. Ask what they like. And the same thing with the faculty, bring them into the conversation also, always.
Dr. Irvin, I know you talked about the mental health struggles of a community, the trauma of events like this. What can we all learn from this conversation and from relearning the events of 50 years ago?
What we really need to learn is that trauma does not disappear on its own, and that it is going to have major effects on your lives, and that you need to attend to whatever is happening inside of you. Sometimes we can be a community of silence, and we've got to do a better job with stopping the stigma around mental health. It is absolutely okay not to be okay. And there's absolutely no one in either of these families that should have been okay on the day that they got the news that their child, their brother, their uncle had been murdered. That was not okay. And so there's no need for you to keep that stuff inside of you, because it is true. Mental health, physical health, those things are all connected. And what we don't deal with, we will eventually live out in some physical sense. That is why we have high blood pressure, why we have diabetes, why we have coronary diseases, much often or more frequently than our white counterparts. We have been taught that we are strong and we should not. And I denounce that. I say, yes, we are a strong people, but I'm also going to say when I am not okay, and we have to learn to accept that.
Denver.
So Professor Angela Bell, who's a law center professor here, published an article not long ago. And her closing remarks was that Smith Brown needs to be more than an occasion, but an opportunity. And so that begs the question, so what do we do with the opportunity and what do we, how we take advantage of the opportunity? And I think that just like with trauma, it was collective. There's some collective things that we need to do, and there's some individual things that we need to do too. One of the things that I heard Mr. Hill talk about earlier this morning was that the students at the time were focused on big things. And, you know, I completely agree that, you know, the administration needs to listen to students and all the things that have been said connected with that. But there's still big things that need to be done today. If we peel back all the layers, to me, I believe my uncle was killed because of systemic racism, which is still a factor in our society today. One of the big things that those students were fighting for back then was an inequity in funding. I looked at the Louisiana State budget, and today the fiscal year budget from 2020, 2023 still offers $1 billion more to LSU than to Southern University. And I looked a little deeper and I was justifying that by saying, well, it's a larger school, there's more students and all that. Still doesn't make logical sense, because today, based on the student population, LSU gets $16,000 per student than Southern University. And I think, and that is directly connected to systemic racism. And I believe that we have work to do in demanding that our tax dollars get used to benefit us. I believe that we need to fight systemic racism where it is. Sure, there's some accountability of the students to learn the history. There's some accountability of the university to help in righting some of these wrongs and also help the students in learning the history. But I think that history being taught that way will force us to demand that we cannot accept this inequity.
Just to touch on what you said, Denver, when I looked up this morning, I found that over the last, I think it was 35 years, that Black land-grant universities have been underfunded by about $12.8 billion. That was over the last 30 years. Southern specifically about $1.3 billion. So definitely that was a huge part of what those students were protesting 50 years ago today. So Dr. Hill, what do you think that we can all learn?
Well, let me add a couple of things to what has been said by the other panelists, and I agree with everything they've said. Two things with just a couple of caveats. First is that we need to embrace our historic memory, which is why I keep emphasizing history. To embrace that historic memory requires us to go and find some answers. Like, for example, first caveat, Southern University has a board because we demanded Southern University gets its board. Consequently, every university under the State Board of Education, guess what? Has a board. That was not the case before 1972. When you actually look at the ways in which Southern University is funded, and you think about what has just been said, you will see this replicated across this country in every state where you have a white land-grant college and a Black land-grant college. Not only is there this great disparity in federal funding, but also great disparity in state funding. That is, the state of Louisiana provides a separate set of money to the white land-grant college, LSU, than it does from Southern. I know, for example, in Mississippi, Alcorn University is a land-grant school. It gets $4 million of state money. Mississippi State gets $24 million of state money. Okay, so we need to understand that memory. We need to grasp that memory. If we fail to grasp our memory, then we are not going to be able to raise our children the way that they ought to be raised. We have seen that. I will argue with you over the last 50 years. The second point, my favorite song, my personal song back in 1972, my friends and colleagues who were with me will attest to this, was Stevie Wonder's Superstition. There's a lyric in there that stays with me. The lyric says, when you believe in things that you don't understand, you will suffer. And the way in which that resonated with me is that I knew then, brother, that, Black people would believe if some politician come and tell them they're going to solve a problem for them or whatever, right? They get happy about that, right? And so they believe that. And then when it doesn't happen, what happens? When we talk about mental health is foreground out here now for a lot of reasons, right? But we also know historically for Black people, if you go back, into slavery, forward, right? We all traumatized. We live traumatized lives every day, whether it's manifested or not. In my case, as I said from the beginning, I relive this every year. But in my case, also, when I left here and I ended up at Fisk University, I continued to struggle, if you will. My mantra when somebody asks me how I'm doing, oh, I'm struggling. Now, I don't mean that my personal circumstances, we all have trappings that make us look certain ways, right? I grew up with a mother with a third grade education who said repeatedly to us, like I come out of a family of 14 kids, said repeatedly to us, you can be poor, if you don't know how to spell that, it's P-O, you can be poor and not looking. And that's one of the mantras, that I have carried with me. I had a grandmother who used to say all the time, boy, I can see shit a mile away. That stayed with me. That stayed with me today, right? I'm looking through walls, right? I'm looking through walls. I'm seeing stuff through walls. I can imagine possibilities and change and so forth, right? So when you believe in things, according to Stephen Wonder in 1972, that you don't understand, you will suffer. And if you want to understand them so you won't suffer, then you got to immerse yourself. We need to figure out what kind of human beings we want to be still. And here we are in the 21st century, and we're talking about something that happened half a century ago. Here we are in the 20th century. Here we are in the 21st century, and we still haven't figured out what kind of human beings we want to be, what slavery did to us. E. Franklin Frazier said that we have to dig deep down inside ourselves and pull out and do a transvaluation. Because if we don't do that, guess what? There will come a time when there will be evidence that we were not here. And I just give you one little sliver. Just look at the blunting of Black America if you don't believe me. Those are my offerings. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hill. And I just want to remind everybody why we're here. In the words of Mr. Rose, this is a cold case. This is not an urban legend. This is not some myth. They are not just some pictures that we have hanging on a wall, that those were actual people. We learned that Denver he was really good at math, way better than a lot of people. And both of them were very caring. We learned that Leonard spoiled his daughter and likely would have spoiled his granddaughter had he been here to bring her into this world. So we've learned a lot. We've been able to kind of paint a picture. And again, I want to remind everybody, they have families. This is a legacy that has continued on, that Denver Terrence has continued on with the Denver Smith Foundation. And I do want to acknowledge, we do have an online audience of Southernites watching online, learning more about this, and I'm sure other people too, because this was such a historical and impactful event. And I think I had some people from the audience who wanted to share a few words. And y'all may not know this lady, but this is Miss Josephine Smith Jones, and this was Denver's sister.
I didn't plan to come here and talk because I'm still going through the earthquake within. I was there. First of all, I attended Southern University the year I graduated in 1971, that summer. I was 17 years old. In 1972, I was a 19-year-old sophomore here at Southern University. My brother Denver, he was junior. He was not a part of the Student United movement at all. He would come to the dorm. He didn't live on campus. He was an off-campus student and would catch the bus every morning. I lived on campus, and he would come and visit me quite often, within the week. 3 days before he was killed, he came to my dorm and he brought me some money because my birthday is on November the 13th. And I said, oh, you remembered, you know. And we kind of laughed, and he was telling us at that time, not just me, the whole suite, to be careful because of the movement that was going on. On that day, I was at the administration building waiting for Nettie-Ville to come to speak. The forces beyond us were so great that we were so fearful, the only safety measure I thought at that time and everybody around me is to go into administration building for safety because there was too much law enforcement on the outside. As we entered the building, we were tear gassed. We heard a lot of noise on the outside. We heard the gunshot. We saw Big Bird, all that before we went in. But the main thing I wanted to say that it's still a process of healing that needs to take place within the family, because we too never talked about it because it was hurtful and it still hurts today. And it's a solid, you know, like a solid killer. That if you say anything, you will burst. So I've done documentaries. And within the documentary, every time it regurgitates hurt, it comes back up again. And this time I said I wasn't going to say anything, but because I was a primary source, I want you to know that it still hurts today. The family is still going through healing today. And my take is that Southern University itself never apologized for any wrongdoing. No one man up to any of the responsibility from the university. And I think that was wrong, even though people are not here. But it's a body. Southern University is a body, and I too did not encourage my children to attend Southern University. I did not come back on the campus. My mom organized an off-campus site, and that's how I finished my school, because she said, you're going to finish. So because of the family and the strength of my mom, I did finish Southern University, but it was an off-campus site. Every time I step on this campus, I still remember everything. I heard about my brother's death on the television. That was another hurt, because I couldn't believe it. I said, I must be in a dream or a nightmare. But I'm not going to take too much of your time because everybody has said a lot. But I felt necessary that I just say a few words about my brother, about my family. And we too are a large family. It was 12 of us. A lot of us has passed, our siblings, but we still have the remnant. So I talked to a young lady, she was saying, you know, registration still haven't changed on Southern University campus. They still give you the runaround. You got to run here, you got to run there. There's no easy way to register for Southern University. That should have changed. 50 years and we're still going through the same struggles. But I would end here because it was a long sit on that chair. So I would close by saying that I do keep my brother alive, but I cannot speak it all the time. So thank you.
Hi, my name's Les Bayham. I started with Mr. Hill over there. We started at Southern in 1970. And I'm gonna be really brief. I'm not a talker. Just to kind of give you you know, what I went through during that time. I was the digest photographer on campus during the time of a lot of the demonstrations and the meetings. And I attended and took pictures of a lot of the meetings that was going on campus and in other areas. Actually, a lot of the pictures you see in the lobby, some of those are some that I took during the time. And I was at the administration building the morning of the 16th and went into the building and was taking pictures and documents of the students in the building. Most of them were sitting in the hallway and just kind of chatting. And then the other incident started on the, on outside. And I came out on standing on the steps of the building. I don't know if any of you seen that We Are Rising video, but there's a guy standing on the left-hand side of the steps with a big afro. The afro was gone now. That was me. I was up there recording and documenting what was going on at the time. And I, when the tear gas started and everything, everybody started dispersing, I was down on the side of the steps and taking pictures of the shooting that was going on. I was documenting it. And I was about 10 feet from Denver when he got hit, when he got shot. And then I later, after things started clearing up and people started going away, the National Guard and the police came up to me and saw I had a camera. And they opened my camera and pulled the film out so I wouldn't have any documentation. So, and, it was a sad day, and I, every year this time I remember this day. And, and I was, like I said, I was 10 feet away. I could have easily been one of the victims. So hopefully we can continue to acknowledge our two students that we lost that day. Thank you.
Like Ms. Jones said, she had a long sentence. So we got a quick little presentation to make. Cedric Knoll, Director of the Student Union. I saw him back there. There he is, right here.
Good morning. I am Cedric Noel, and I'm the Director of the Student Union. And joining me is our current SGA 2022-2023 SGA President, Mr. Carlos Brister, and our 2022-23 National Alumni Federation President, Mr. Carlton Jones. At this time, we will ask a representative from each family to please come forward, from the Brown family as well as the Smith family, please. Ms. Brown, we see you. Thank you. Ms. Wallace, I'm sorry. On behalf of Southern University, the Smith Brown Memorial Union, Smith Brown Memorial Union Commemoration Committee, Southern University of Baton Rouge, Louisiana, we would like to take this time to present a token to show our concern and awareness for you. We know that we cannot bring your sons back, but we do speak their name every day. And we keep them alive as well as their legacy alive every day. At this time, you present to them, please. And Ms. Wallace, we will be sending you your presentation as well.
I was here during that time. I came to Southern the same time with Mr. Hill, 69-7. That's when my thought was at Southern University. Some of the things that Mr. Hill said about what's happening, I could contest to that. Like Burnside, home, I was there at Burnside during that time. One thing I want to say though about my brother, before my brother was killed, he was playing basketball in the men's gym. And a friend of mine told me, he told them, him and Leonard was together. Said, we going down there and see what's going on down there. And he told, don't go down there, it's just trouble. They went down there, and that was it.
And before we go, Mr. Denver Terrence has a scholarship presentation for the Smith Brown Scholarship as a part of the Denver Smith Foundation.
So my name is Denver Terrence. I am president and founder of the Denver Smith Foundation. And one of the things we do, in addition to keeping the name of my uncle alive, is to award money for deserving scholars. This year, 2 of the recipients are actually students at Southern University. And so we would like to present to them a scholarship. Ms. Williams and Ms. Dukes. Brock Fisher, who's also a graduate of Southern University and a board member of the foundation, is going to read the achievement of these 2 wonderful scholars.
Good afternoon. We have 2 amazing young women that have been awarded scholarships. Miss Ciasia Williams is a 2-time recipient of the Denver Smith Foundation Memorial Scholarship. A senior nursing major at Southern University, Ciasia aspires to pursue a career in traveling nursing, servicing minority and under service communities. She's a first-generation college student hailing from Louisville, Kentucky. She's noted patient care, representation, financial security, and advocacy as driving factors for her career endeavors. Ms. Ciasia plans to dedicate her practice as a healthcare worker solely to midwifery, excuse me, and assisting with safe, holistic women's healthcare. She intends to amplify the representation of Black women in her field and utilize education to provide much of the needed advocacy, support, and education to her patients and colleagues. Now, I read this little small snippet of a bio, but I think back to what we were talking about as far as holistic treatment for the mental health issues that we have as Black in the community, where we don't get that. Usually it's a system of pick yourself up, brush yourself off, get back out there. I won't even say it's specifically for Black men, it happens with Black women too. So I commend Ms. Williams just for putting herself out there and trying to like reach back to people that have been in the position she's been in and say, hey, look, I've learned this. Let me come back to my community and show you how to deal with these things, so it's not such an issue for you. And we have Ms. Lauren Dukes. Excuse me. She's also a freshman mechanical engineering major at Southern University. Her curiosity of technology and mechanics inspired her at an early age. Throughout middle school and high school, Lauren was enrolled in engineering, coding, and robotics. I took French, like, and other courses, and competed in national competitions such as Future City, Sea Perch, and First Lego League. She aspires to own her own engineering firm one day with the intention to further the advancement of Black in STEM. Lauren is also passionate about teaching Black children the importance of mental health and financial literacy. She hopes to use her platform and education to create a space in which people feel free to express themselves and prepare for their futures financially at a younger age. you don't hear that. In the younger generation now, you're not hearing anything about financial literacy. You're not hearing anything about reaching back to bring people who are, look like you into STEM programs. So I commend both of these lovely young ladies on the job. Well done.
Well, I think I speak on behalf of everyone up here and everyone with the university. Thank y'all so much for attending. This was a much needed conversation. Ms. Shonda Wallace, thank you so much for joining us from afar. We appreciate all of your words. And obviously our whole panel up here. Thank y'all so much for your participation. And we do invite you, there's going to be a student roundtable right here at 2 o'clock. So we'll break briefly and then they'll have the roundtable at 2. And then at 5, there's an event coming up at the old state capitol. I believe Governor John Bel Edwards is going to be there, and they're going to be playing the cold case investigation episode 50 into the 50th anniversary of the tragedy that happened here on our campus. Thank you to the Brown and Smith families for participating, and everyone have a great day.
You too. Thank you.
Yeah.